All right, budget is now just 6 days away. Exactly on Saturday, this time the budget would have been tabled on the floor of the parliament. Markets would have started reacting. The initial reactions on Saturday, same time, would eventually start kicking in. But in terms of expectations, the startup world clearly is expecting nothing momentous, but pretty much a relief in terms of what this budget could do. Now, startup, which in a sense was termed to be the sideshow a couple of years ago, when I say about a decade ago, now has become the mainstay. Startup entrepreneurs, both in India and outside India, really have been the flag bearers of Viksit Bharat story. From the rise of Zomato to the creation of Paytm, from the kind of positioning with, let's say, a policy fintech is now currently enjoying. The Indian tech or the Indian startup companies right now are pretty much enjoying a pedestal positioning, both in terms of the impact and also in terms of the respect. But there are a lot of niggling issues which, in a sense, they need to be ironed out before this budget. Some on taxation front, some on the funding front, and in general, what can be done to make the startup ecosystem, which currently is growing, to accelerate. Who would have thought that 10 years ago, in India, startup, in a sense, would start commanding a seat on the table, so to speak, when it came to big ticket negotiations. Ronnie Screwvala, a dear friend, co-founder and chairman of Upgrade, a leading voice in terms of what the startup community, the startup space he represents, and what an extraordinary gentleman when it comes to his philanthropic ventures. So Ronnie, always a delight and a pleasure to have you on ET Now. Now we are speaking to you just few days ahead of the union budget. You've been quite vocal about industry expectations. Skilling is one big issue and you've pushed for it. If I could request you to share your wish list for this year's budget.
So I would just say, number one, the focus for us at least, and I think for India, is really to create more self-employment opportunities. Second, I think we're done with being an outsourced country. And I think the world is recognizing us for our talent pools, and they're recognizing us for our ability to create intellectual properties. Even the US administration that's just joined in has actually commented on the fact we'd be happy to welcome people from India that can help them grow their prowess there. So I think the number one priority is talent pool improvement. Now, when you're looking at that, because we're not going to be a Viksit Bharat A, and we're not going to be able to get hundreds of billions of dollars of foreign investment unless they actually feel there's a talent pool here that can service the local market and also create great companies and organizations. The startup ecosystem also needs that. So to that level, I think this is where more and more of that focus, I expect in this budget that the finance minister will further clarify some of their internships and the skilling priorities that they've been able to do. Second, education more or less has been GST exempt. But I think today more than ever, the ability that when you are just done with your work life and you want to actually continue with a learning through your life, that should be the same category as education across the board. So your forever learning category needs to be expanded, because that's going to give a lot of motivation to a lot of people to skill and learn even more.
Angel tax revocation last year was a big announcement. How much has that changed the funding ecosystem in the country? And secondly, connected to that is the ease of doing business. What is your key ask, given that it still remains a concern?
Firstly, the angel tax required a clarification because it was a capital account versus a revenue account, and I'm glad they clarified that. It took away the context of this thing. Today, if you see, India is becoming a destination for people to list. Everyone's jumping hooplas around the place to relocate and hub their countries in India. So that should be a major takeaway. Nobody wants to be in Singapore, nobody wants to be in the US, they all want to list in India. So this whole reverse merger, I mean, just recently the NCLT did a landmark judgment and actually approved the merger and the reverse merger of a situation. So that is something that I think is going to be very important. Ease of doing business is a nice terminology and it has its overall rankings. But actually, there's a competitive edge, which I would tell almost every startup entrepreneur. You drop ease of this thing to a certain level, and the competitiveness with which you need to be, you don't know which world you're working on. So I'm not saying, therefore, there should not be ease of doing business. I think there's an Indian way of doing that. I think we're in multiple states, we're in multiple markets, we're in multiple price threshold. So I would not over-exaggerate, because the grass always looks green on the other side, it never is. So I think the ability for us to be actually having what I would call a head start in being able to operate in this market is something that most people from overseas actually respect and look at this market of homegrown approach rather than us focusing only on the negatives of a situation where ease of doing business. So I have a different point of view on that.
Coming to job creations, given the wage gap, which only seems to be widening in India, what approach government should take now and how much should the private sector push that agenda?
I think India will have to, if we want to create 200 million jobs, we'll have to create more and more of an opportunity for us to be able to create self-employment. I'm seeing that from our foundation in rural India. 5 years back, when we used to skill 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 youth, we needed to find them jobs. Today, only 50% we need to find jobs. The other 50% are figuring out how to become self-employed. So that DNA, while we talk about the startup ecosystem, and that's always reserved for funding and unicorns, actually the heartbeat is the self-employment category, which I think India will have to do. We're not going to be able to create that many jobs. None of the sectors are going there. Sure, for every BFSI that's plateauing, a GCC and a new market is coming in. Manufacturing is going to a certain level thanks to our China advantage. But by and large, I would say self-generation is going to happen. Second, in this consumption pattern, I just feel strongly, and there's a lot being done in what I would call fostering and giving money in the hands in rural India. But really today, I think if we can figure out a way in which rural credit goes up, because 70 to 80% of non-salaried people can't get any credit. And the economy and consumption can't go to the next level if you don't have credit. So for all of us, we take it for granted. We have a debit card, we have a credit card, we have some history. People don't have a history. But in India, I think for us, we have to create an ecosystem where actually the defaults happen less and less, by the way, the poorer you are or the more needy you are. So if we can get some sense of really spurred up rural credit that allows people to take on even 50,000, 1 lakh, 2 lakh loans, that's going to creep up and create a massive push in terms of overall consumption, because that's 600 million people that's going to be able to consume.
Speaking of a growth blip in India in Q2, are you seeing this just a blip due to pullback from capex due to general elections? And what is your view what government can do to spur some more growth?
Well, I did mention the rural credit part, right? I think the question is what's the mindset of a country for spending? I think wallet shares in India have been evolving for a fair period of time. First you had a very savings-set economy. The younger generation is a much more spending economy, but in that spending economy, they have a different context. The element of now feeling that you need to upskill yourself constantly and keep some money for ongoing forever learning and education is becoming a high priority. Fourth, COVID has put a scare on people on health, insurance, and just that sense of safety of yourself and your family. So if you look at that, there's been quite a shift in the approach of how people look at wallet share spending. 6.5%. And second is, I would say, overall, we're not a disconnected country from the rest of the world, right? Of course, it's domestic consumption, but there's a lot happening around the world that raises a lot of questions for people of what they need to spend. And I think that global connected economy also allows us to be able to do that. But I wouldn't be that concerned or worried about a little bit of a blip in the consumption standard points of view. From a corporate results point of view, yes, corporates that are in that sense would have it. But as an overall country in the growth trajectory, I think we're making incredible strides.
There has been a sense of uncertainty due to the new Trump administration coming around tariffs and shifting fund flows. How concerned are you on India's growth story and how exactly, according to you, it is playing out?
I think personally, if you ask me, it's a very personal point of view. I think, the Trump administration is going to be overall good for India. Because I think there's a stronger sense of mutual respect. We're on the radar, and I think that mutual respect is going to pay out. I mean, on a lighter note, I might stick my neck out, by almost saying I get the sense talking to people that Europe today is more scared of Trump than they are of Putin. And that's quite telling. And I don't think that's going to be the case when it comes to India.
What is the issue of private investment that was expected to really pick up momentum? It has not happened. Why do you think it has got delayed, and at a time when government is firing all cylinders on the capex front? And what do you recommend to kickstart? And what are your recommendations to kickstart this entire broken down wheel?
I think that's changing. I mean, just look at the stock market today. Almost 30% now is held by, the top 20, 30 mutual funds. So if you look at foreign capital, this entire stock market was so dependent on FIIs. And now that entire dependency has changed. So I think when you look at that, you look at some of the states and the pledges that are manufacturing hubs, the amount of companies that are going to set up GPC centers in India versus anywhere else in the world, I think private investment is coming. And look, infrastructure-wise, there's no slowing down between ports, airports, and roads. There is a fair amount of that happening. If you look at, some of the things in the electronic medium and Apple and what's happening with Apple and Foxtel, those are also very, 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 very telling. For, Maruti continues and automobile sectors going in for a lot of innovation. China has given US a big run for electric vehicles. And I think India is going to, in the EV sector, we're hugely. I think data center investment in India is going to be high. So I think some will go off and some will come in.
So which are some of the sectors you currently are bullish on, Ronnie, now?
But I think the kind of investments that are coming to this country on creating data centers for around the world is big. And I think you'll be surprised at how much that can come in. It's almost can change it like the IT sector did it. If you look at solar and some of the renewable parts here, these are not very sexy ones when you come to food delivery and transport and EV. But those are the ones actually that are the bedrock of some serious investments that are happening there. We may not be that absolute manufacturing hub in the country, but there are some places in which we are actually excelling, and in some states we're actually excelling on that. So, you can see from my tenure that I'm a lot more bullish because I know what, I think we all as entrepreneurs know what it takes really to get things going. And you need that positive spirit and not look at the skeptical part of it, because we today have more going for us than many other countries in the world.
Thoughts on the 10-minute delivery business and the QCom sector?
Firstly, I think kudos and remarkable that it got the fancy enough for it to be. It's very difficult to market make, and it's very, very difficult to create a market out of nothing. So I think kudos that a market was just created. You can call it a little bit of perfect timing, but at the end of the day, kudos to them. Second, I think because of that, people have got used to a certain sense of lifestyle. It's not happened anywhere else in the world. It's just happened in this one place here. So that's not going to be the case that's going to change around. So if you look at that element there, I think the 10-minute part has really broken the mold in many ways. No question about that. Now, my other concern is the herd mentality that just keeps following in and coming in. There's a complete herd mentality. So I think we need to just watch out for that, because everyone's building up capacity to a great level. I think water will find its own level in terms of innovation to where it's going. Personally, I don't get it. I don't get but it's become a lifestyle change. I hope it's not a fad. That's all I would say.
So how will this change the e-com and the retail? And many say that this could also pose a threat to the e-commerce delivery timelines. Timelines could be reduced drastically.
Well, look, everything is a threat to something. AI is a threat to machine learning, and something else is a threat to something, and digital is a threat to broadcasting. So, e-commerce was a threat to retail, but retail has been around, even though e-commerce has been around for the longest period of time. It's continued and gone on from there. The good part is, I think it's only going to spur consumption, because now this is impulse shopping. So this is, when you're buying 4 out of the 10 things on a 10-minute basis, I don't think you would have bought them with careful thinking, or they were delivery of 2 days and 3 days and whatever else. So each of them is spurring consumption, and I think that's an overall positive.
See the edutech story shaping up as the online learning space is going to shrink cost post-COVID?
Look, the whole world is looking for talent. Forever learning is here. Skilling is what the whole mantra is almost in every country in the world. So whether investors come or investors don't come, this is not a sector that needs that kind of capital either. I'll be very clear about it. I think it's been spoiled by too much capital. But I think it's going to be a huge value creator and a huge value unlocker without needing too much capital. So I think the people who actually look at frugal innovation are going to stand out over the next 4 to 5 years. I think anyone looking at being successful in the next 1 or 2 years could be a bit of an unpleasant surprise, because this is about a long horse people are going to outlast each other, because that's how important the sector is. So that's what I would say. And it doesn't need to happen that way.
So what the government can do to boost the startup segment, given that the Prime Minister is looking at building in India and building India for the world? There has been an ask from the industry to, let's say, set up sovereign wealth funds, sovereign funds, instead of depending on foreign capital. Do you think that should be considered?
A government has to be an evangelist. A government has to be the enabler. A government has to be, to that extent, a catalyst. And I think they're doing a good job on that, a very good job. I think more than that actually creates, and then, yeah, you can figure out how to make it more easier, more accessible to do business, to wind it up, to have the risk, whatever else, and create that ecosystem and confidence and perception around the world that capital can be attractive. But at the core of it, there should be an enabler, a catalyst, and an evangelizer, which they're doing very well on. I'm not very kicked about government starting funds in that context, because those are high risk propositions and they always get to audit. There's always a subjectivity to that whole thought. Yeah, lots of countries are looking at setting up sovereign funds, and I think India could set up its own sovereign fund. My only point is that as soon as you set up a sovereign fund in that nature, the people who run it are not going to make the bets that need to be made about the ones that are risky, the ones that are futuristic. They'll more, and that money will flow into capital markets and be more hedgy. So sovereign funds sometimes need to be actually backing the next frontier. And I'm not sure that normally happens.
All right, Ronnie, appreciate your time. Good to connect with you, and thank you for your thoughts. Let's take a break. When we come back, it's all about budget, and we'll also analyze the sudden fall in the market. The small cap index is down another 4% now.